In this video, I'm going to teach you how to do this with just dry brushing. So painting inspiration comes from many strange, weird and wonderful places. I get mine a lot from colour schemes I see in nature and stuff like that. This is kind of nature. That is a dog in infrared thermal imaging, whatever it is you call it, but I love this colour spectrum here. That is amazing. So that's where I found my inspiration. I painted this before and now I have this, which I'm super pleased with. That is 100% dry brushing on the colour parts. No edge highlighting, no glazing, no airbrushing. It looks the bomb. I am super pleased with this. Really, really striking. Would look amazing on any tabletop. So please watch if you like it. If you want to subscribe to our channel, that would be most appreciated. Hit that bell notification so you can see our future releases, and any questions or queries you have, just put them below. We answer everything, we read everything, we take all suggestions on board. They all go into a spreadsheet. So I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you learned something good. Okay, so here we are, and this video is starting off in a slightly unusual fashion because here's a picture of a dog on my phone. Just found it on the internet. It's been taken with a thermal camera. I love dogs. Also love cats, but what we're really interested in is the color scheme here. So this bar is what I want you to pay attention to. That is where I'm taking my inspiration for this color scheme from. So I want to go from a dark, cool, cold color to a warm color. I've been told by some grumpy people that I paint turquoise too much. Case in point, but I've got a Necron Nightside. I've painted them quite a lot before. I love this kit. Really, really flexible, great for a load of paint schemes. There's also quite a cool conversion you can do where you can put the wings on backwards that I've never tried before, but I'd like to. So let's jump in. We are going to try and paint this just like that dog. Let's go. Okay, so having followed my dog picture, I've used a lot of the sets from here, a lot of the colours from this set rather. This is the Scale 75 Fluorescent Experience, which is almost in the colour scheme we need in terms of the box. A lot of these are fluorescent, which don't tend to have fantastic coverage. I'm not sure if I'm going to have to introduce some other stuff. I'll, of course, make sure that our tutorial features a comprehensive list of the paints I actually end up using. These are the ones I'm intending on using, though, because currently I've got a blank canvas. So we're going to start off, as normal, with a super solid base of these two mixed. We'll stipple that on, and then from there we're going to be going to the more colourful stuff. Okay, so any of you who've seen our videos before be familiar with this step. I'm just doing a stipple base coat. I'm actually using an incredibly old Series D brush here. This is it's probably 2 and a bit years old. It's one of the original testers before we even had text on. Our brushes shrink down. They don't splay out, they don't break, they break in. So one thing you will find though is that they become less flexible as they get shorter. So mine tend to be they have a restricted selection of uses in that I use them for stippling more as they get more short. It takes quite a long time, but if you look after them, they can literally be used until they're like probably half of this length remaining. This brush has probably lost 3/4 of its length over a course of about 2 years and is still absolutely perfect for at least half of the jobs that the originals are. Okay, so that's gone on really nicely. This is a thoroughly underrated technique as far as efficient base coating goes. I'm just getting rid of a little of the excess because it's an extremely potent colour, especially the Huldra Blue. That's why we use it. Just getting rid of that excess. I'm about to take some white, which is going to end up not being white because it's gone on a brush that's had the blue on it. And this is going to make kind of a mid-tone grey. This isn't precise whatsoever, but I'm going to be using this to put down some pre-highlighting on the center sections of these panels. So very simply, I'm just going to be avoiding the lines. That's all you need to worry about. You do not need to worry about precision. If you go over a line, do not worry about that. You could use a smaller brush if that made you feel better about this, but honestly, I do not think it is something that you need to be agitated about whatsoever. So I'll do this all over the model. I probably won't do a second stage with a more pure white. You could do that if you wanted to pre-shade more, but I just want to make sure that the bright colours we put on have a little bit of a helping hand as far as their I want to give them the best start in life they can, the best and the brightest. So I'll be doing this all over the model. Important to note, it's very easy to miss the end sections of these panels, so just make sure you get in there and get them, because otherwise it will stand out a little bit when the edges aren't as bright. If you want the edges to be darker, that's fine, but I'm just going to go between all of these and give them a couple of dabs just to make sure they tie in with it. That is going to be us pretty much done. Doesn't look neat, but that's not what we're going for. Okay, so if like me you get a little bit of overspill in the recesses, don't worry about it. I've just grabbed a medium D here and I'm going with pure blue because that's our most recessed colour, and you can just do the exact opposite of what you've done in your previous step. This is kind of a transitioning between like a fixing and pre-highlighting or pre-shading more accurately, and then also our first stage of painting. So if you want to exaggerate any of the work you've done here around these panels, you can absolutely do that, and it will kind of transition from fixing into your first step. So that's what I'll do here. It's up to you how heavy or light you go with these. You could use a smaller brush. Like I said, you could take your time, really take your time with all these steps and produce something actually incredibly precise. I'm not going to do that, but it's an absolutely fine way to proceed. So we're not bringing the purple in yet, even though we had a little bit of it in the base coat, which is pretty much hidden at this stage. We're just starting to follow these lines, and we're literally painting within the lines and the gaps here. The nice thing about this is that these bits are just far too fiddly to do with the previous stage, so you can actually fairly carefully follow these lines up and down. And catch them that way. If you want to do it smoother, one thing you have available to you is do the first pass when you've got more paint on the brush, and then once the paint's been worked off a little bit, you can fade it out. At this stage we're kind of doing a cool eyes paint job, but we're going to obscure all of that pretty soon anyway. So this is the step one, and then we'll continue into the purple step. So basically at this point we are just going to be transitioning through the entire suite of colours that we've got available to us. So I've got my purple, my deeper purple on my palette. I'll mix that with my blue and start putting that around this section, trying to leave some of the white showing, but it's fine if we can't. And then I will transition to pure purple, and then the purple with a light kind of more magenta-y one. So I'm still using the medium, a little bit of that crazy deep blue. And at this point it might actually be quite hard to not hit the white. That's why I'm trying to do it using the purple here. Let's get a little bit more of this one in the mix, because this is the important one. This is what starts kind of pumping up into the far lighter spectrum. And just take your time, build up your stages, start at a point that you're fine with being completely purple. Use your dampening pad. That will have the effect of diluting your paint, basically, smoothing it, and it'll protect your brushes as well. And then leave a little bit of your blue if possible. If not, it doesn't matter if you touch it, as long as it's already going to do its work. The colours we're using here are just so much lighter than that Huldra Blue that whatever we do is going to preserve fairly nicely. And it's basically, again, we're just filling in the gaps at this point. It's very easy. I don't think we are going to be able to preserve that white, but at least it's going to bring our purple up a notch. So take this approach with all of your panels. Can neaten out the edges. You do not want any of your white pre-shading showing through. If you need to jump back to your blue, still there on your palette, your brush won't care. Just give it a little bit of wash off. You can see how much washing I'm doing on my brush as I go here. This is why my brushes last for so long, and this is why the texture palette is so useful. So if you did want to, that's all you need to do, and then you're fine here to jump back to the blue and fix any mistakes you've got. So we'll fill in all of these sections and then we'll come back. Right, so as we said, we are transitioning into our Vallejo paint. It's just Vallejo, model color magenta. If you have a brighter, more vibrant equivalent of this, you could absolutely use that. You could drop a drop of ink in, that's always a good bet. We are going to be using our pink soon, so what I can do is put a little bit of it on the palette, and I can pull a small amount of that into what we're doing here, but it's not a, given the type of paint it is, it's not hugely, it needs to go over something bright or with something bright or desaturated to take hold, which is why we often mix it with ice yellow. So at this point we're going to be starting quite carefully. You need to use the dampening pad here, and this is a really important stage because this is where we really start ratcheting up the colour. So this is the point at which we probably have to stop being so lazy and start being careful with exactly where we're putting our paint. Gently, softly, and again, pretty easy. This is one of the reasons why I love the Night Scythe Doom Scythe kit, because if you follow these patterns you end up with a load of little cells and you just have to repeat the right sequence in the right order, and they tell you exactly where to put everything. So I'll be proceeding with care all over the model, and we'll just fill in all of these panels like that. Worth noting, we are going to start bringing in traditional dry brushing at this stage. So when you put down these stages, lightly and carefully give it an all over dry brush, making sure to not hit any sections that are still drying like that one there, and this will make sure that we catch our edges exactly and just help smooth everything out. Okay, so I thought this was worth showing you. I'm pretty much doing what I was, but this stage here is just one earlier, so this has pretty much been a containing a slight amount of our previous deep purple, and then softly, very dilute paint. Here the paint is still dilute, but I've used entirely magenta, and I've actually pulled a tiny bit of the pink in there. So what I wanted to show you is actually how I'm using the dampening pad. So here, this paint that's acting, let's see if I can show my thumb. It's tiny little, fairly dilute splotches. And it's a really nice way, particularly if you're slightly worried about how vibrant a colour is, or you don't want to do too much too early, or something like that. It's a really good way to make sure that those blobs of paint you're putting down are just going to be less opaque if they're more diluted. So that's how I've got from this bit here to this bit here, and then we're just going to carry on rocketing through until we get something that is going to be obscenely bright. I'm pleased with how it's going so far. I think maybe these sections are a little bit too dark, but I have the dry brushing available to me, which I can probably show you now once I've got rid of a little bit of this. So I'll hit up all of my edges, making sure we don't forget those. Keep rotating that brush. And then I can stipple away any of the excess here. It's a nice thing about working with dilute paint, you can either work more carefully with thicker or less carefully with thinner, or find somewhere in the middle, which is normally, that's the stage when you think like, oh my god, I've unlocked it, things are going amazingly here, this is actually quite a good indication of that. So with the moisture and paint surplus worked out from the bristles, hopefully now we're in a stage where we can gently do a little bit of buffy dry brushing, and it's not going to be anything that jumps out or is crazily noticeable at this stage, but it will just pull up those darker sections. I'm going to panel line these sections later just to make sure they remain with high contrast, but this is the really important step to making sure that you don't end up with a final result that looks too much like this, and in fact, even if it seems unbelievable at this stage, you end up with something whereby everything fades into each other really nicely, which is what we're going for. We're going for the evil purple twin of this one. Surprise, surprise, we are adding more pink to our magenta. This is starting to show up now. It's not biting or showing up as readily as I would have thought, but it is a little more powerful than I thought for a fluorescent paint. So I'm proceeding fairly carefully and doing exactly what we've been doing before in basically a narrower banding in the sections that already exist. So just as we were with the previous steps, stipple it down until you're happy with the amount on the brush, and then very carefully pick out edges. Make sure, especially as you're stippling with a slightly wetter mix than normal, to try and make sure we've got that transparency. Really make sure that you take care before doing the dry brushing part on the model, because it's very easy, even if not much paint is coming off when you're stippling, to have something that can pretty much smear your model or something like that, and we need to take care at these stages, especially when working with a brighter paint. So stipple it all over the section until you're really super confident that it's going to behave exactly how you want. And then at that point, there you go. We can start paying some attention to the edges and do our gentle over buffing. So at this stage, we've still got quite a lot of colours to work through. I'm not sure if we're actually going to have space. We might have to use them on the canopy instead. But I am taking special care with the edges, he says. And I'm doing some fairly swift edge highlighting, still with a dry brush. And what I like to do with edge highlighting is highlight it from, basically you want to get your edge and then cross your brush at 45 degrees, that's angle you should be at, and then hit it from this side and then also hit it from this side. And that gives you pretty much a perfect width of line. Obviously you don't want too much paint on the brush or anything like that. Start that from that side, and then I can take the same angle here and then work from this side with it in shot ideally. There we go. And hopefully that shows up nicely there. Starting to take shape now. Really, really looking pretty bright. Okay, so I've actually swapped out from scale 75 fluorescents because they're a bit more matte, and it's making it slightly more difficult to control how much paint is absorbed by them. In terms of, I put on one layer on top of a previous layer. If that's a very matte layer, it goes and sucks the paint up really quick. So I'm trying to make sure that that isn't a thing. So I've changed this yellow and the orange are scale 75, so are not scale 75, they're Vallejo. So I'm going to be trying them out a little bit and seeing if we can mix them up. So I'm going to start really pale here, kind of peachy colour. That's not stood out too much, so I think we're going to be okay. I'm still going to take care, and I'm definitely going to work with fairly diluted paints. We've got some ice yellow ready, just in case we have troubles getting this to basically adhere to the model to grab onto these colours as much, because we're just using fluorescents. They're really good for glazes, but we're looking to still put down some kind of layer equivalents at this point. So if we do have issues, then we can just pull that there from our palette and work in with it. I guess I could actually take a tiny bit of the previous purple. Okay, so as I've said many times, we're proceeding with caution. As we get to these brighter ones, they're really going to stand out more, which makes some things harder or means that we have to be more delicate. But other things, such as edge highlighting, as you can see here, it makes way easier. This orange is doing some interesting stuff as the edge highlight for our previous purple stages. Super quick work here. Put that down there, and then I'll just continue gently working into the central areas of these, remembering to use the dampening pad and take it step by step, not looking to do anything too drastic because these are bright colours. And then when we've worked our way to a stage where we're happy that we can proceed with confidence, you can do rolling edge highlighting, which like this. I'm exaggerating the motion, but essentially that makes sure that you just hit the one edge you want to hit. Very, very soft. There we go. All right, so I've brought in the cavalry in the form of our extra large. So the reason I brought this in, make sure we've got some water in our dampening pad. The reason I brought this in is because I want to, a couple of reasons. I want to be hitting edges with a big fat soft brush, and also we've been working with the same medium for a long time. It's had some heavy traffic. It's in pretty good shape, but it's not behaving as it would have at the start of the session. So This is one of the reasons to always use the biggest brushes for the job, because you can get a longer working time out of them. If you are really diligent between steps, that helps as well. So I'm going to be taking a little bit of our pink, quite a lot of our pink actually, because we know how bright the orange is. Working that in, test it on my hands, a bit too wet, so I'll take off some of the moisture. Orange. Now we know that the orange is far more potent than the pink we've been working with, so again, testing it carefully, and then we're using this to hit edges. We can do that same rolling technique we've done before, but we can also gently buff up with surprising detail, because we can just use the middle bit of the brush. We can buff up the central sections here, and basically all we've got remaining to us at this stage is to steadily and carefully increase this as we go through. We can jump between brushes. We've got yellow to bring in as well, so at the stage that when we're happy that pure orange doesn't stand out too much, we can jump towards our yellow, so we'll get a little bit of the orange there. Actually a little bit too much water on that dampening pad for this brush, because I've used the back of the larger brush. Obviously the larger the brush is, the more it will deposit. Not sure how this is showing up on the camera, because the fluorescents do get picked up way more easy than the background colours by lenses. It's important to have this stuff going on, even if you can't see. It's not like a hugely obvious step in what you're doing here. It does count. This is like the fat highlight that you do before an edge highlight if you were doing the kind of heavy metal approach to power armor. Exactly the same reasoning. The more dilute it is, the less careful you need to be, obviously. Make sure that none of our sections have been neglected, because it will be fairly obvious at the end of this if one of them just hasn't been touched by orange at all until it gets to the edges, so make sure we catch all of them. We can jump back to our big brush. I'm actually going to pull in a little bit of the yellow. Let's see how this goes. Some of the orange. It's a very bright colour. Big brushes here. And then a tiny bit of white. I'm going to involve that. If you've watched any of our previous videos, the ghost wool, the fluorescent green wool, you'll know why we're using the white here. It's not because we want stuff to get desaturated or lighter. That's not the way that we're particularly looking to go, but we do want stuff to show up more easily. And with fluorescent paints, putting something light underneath them is the best way to achieve that. Think of them like a filter. They're there and they will emulate whatever is underneath them, and that has quite a large and noticeable influence on the final effect you get with them. So putting this stage down now, even though it's just got a tiny bit of white in it. I'm being careful, I'm not going too hard physically, because otherwise you'll get white being picked up on areas that aren't the edges that you specifically want to hit here. So I'm not just going to scrunch it around and in the middle of these panels. Ooh. We're getting some paint from a previous paint job there. Let's fix that. There we go, so we've brought up those edges nicely. This is what you get if you don't clean your brushes. Naughty. Alright, so we'll go through and take off those couple of flecks we've got, and then we're going to grab the edges. Pays dividends to be careful with this. It's a very different colour to anything else we've got on the model. Tiny bit of orange. Pull a little bit of pink into the mix. Test it somewhere else. When we're happy that it's not doing anything unexpected, you can then start taking it to the rest of the model and even adding a tiny bit more white. As ever, you want it to be worked thoroughly onto every side of our brush, even though it's round. I'm going to use that rolling highlighting that I showed you earlier, hopefully to good effect. You have to bear in mind that anywhere this touches, when we touch it with our next colours, it is going to be drastically brighter than the rest of the model. And then once we've got it at a stage where we're really happy that we can proceed without ruining anything, roughly hit the rest of the model. There, really starting to take shape now. These are the stages that work wonders. Black lining will also do a lot for this model here, if we can get some stuff in the recesses. So at this point, dampening powder first, a little bit of orange, work it in. The remaining dregs of our pink should be just about in time. And then we can do exactly the same steps that we've just done with the yellow. So we haven't had yellow on the model yet, so this is obviously going to stand out quite a lot. There you go, so super bright edges from 45 degrees. And if we flip it over, we can also get the bottom lips of these. We'll probably hit this with the white first actually, so it catches. We can do that now, once we've worked this off the brush. Feels magic when you get to this stage. You can do so much stuff in a way that feels carefree rather than carefully stippling. This is the beauty of putting in the groundwork. So grab a little bit of white here. Make sure our brush isn't too wet, but we want a little on there just to help it leave super easily. Work it in. So to show you pre-highlighting live, we don't have to worry about the bottom of it because obviously we've not touched that yet. Just hitting that bottom lip. Just to be specific, I'm trying to catch this lip here, the bottom lip of the top section. We can get it from left and right as well to catch the panel lines. While we're here, a little bit more edge highlighting here. And what I'm going to start doing is concentrate on the middle of the panel sections, so not close to the black lines. Middle of the circle, middle of the top and bottom section, and then grab that yellow, which is a pretty scarily bright colour considering what we've been using so far. Tiny bit of orange, the orange is strong, so that'll drag it back a little bit. And then starting here, really see how that filter's going on the black section above it. Bring it to focus. There you go. So It's a long stage, but that is the final highlighting done. We're looking pretty crazy here. It's up to you. You could stipple more into these sections. You could do more of the yellow. More stippling could actually look really good. If you built up to this orange a little more, we can do that kind of retrospectively now without too much worry of how it'll look on the model. Even with a big brush, just bring up the kind of the universal level of the model to a slightly brighter stage. It's up to you how much you want to go for on these stages. There we go. That is looking amazing. All right, so we are pretty much done. Okay, I lied. I couldn't resist the ice yellow, so we're doing exactly what we were doing in our previous step. With the ice yellow added to the mix. And basically the reason for this is I just wanted slightly sharper edges. That's easier if we've got something in the mix. I didn't want it to be white. Beautiful. That is pretty striking. You can see here you wouldn't think you'd be able to get from this to this, but you absolutely can. Equally, if you just wanted to keep in this spectrum and not involve the yellow or the orange, particularly, you could even just skip steps out and go straight up and have a mega vibrant purple. All of these would look good. You'd end up with an effect that looked more like kind of more like that, I guess. Perfect example of just how sharp edge highlighting can be if you've got the right amount of paint on your brush. So there we go, that's awesome, super pleased with that. So spoiler alert, it worked out really, really well. This is all done in pretty much the same way. I think the top section was more successful, probably because I learned from doing the bottom section. So the things I really want people to pay attention to are just how much of a difference our little smudge that we did with the deep blue, the shading, that was really, really effective and really helps push the contrast. And I think this perhaps works even better on slightly organic shape. So there's some learning points here. Maybe we should have used a smaller brush or spaced out our colors slightly differently, but it's worked out really well. So please enjoy the canopy section. Pay particular attention to just how much of a difference this bit here makes, this kind of like glowy detail, and the fact that things are brighter towards the top of the spherical sections or the top of this slightly domed one. We're trying to suggest kind of it being reflective there, or light sources or something like that, and it really, really pulls the eye, so that's been really effective in it. I hope you enjoyed the painting of the canopy. Really pleased with how this turned out, and the entire overall effect is fantastic. Okay, so beginning just as we have been base coating previously with Huldra Blue. If you struggle to get hold of Huldra Blue, you could use another deep blue from another manufacturer. People have specifically said they've struggled to get hold of this one. Huldra Blue can be replaced for deep blue, which is the scale color version. Very, very similar. And particularly given that we're going to be covering over quite a lot of the first step, it doesn't matter if you swap it out for something else. I do really like this color though, so if you can use it, I would recommend it. Super quick base coat, just as normal. We'll pop this all over and then come back once it's dried. Okay, so we're moving on to magenta, and as I mentioned with the previous one, it's up to you what ratios you use of what paint. So I'm skipping out, you can see on my palette here, because I've done it fairly recently, I'm actually skipping out the Xeris purple stage here, and this is in an effort to have a faster transition to a brighter color, which is the aim for this section. Whatever I do is going to seem extremely bright in comparison to the previous color because it's deep blue over black. I'm just going to pop over here, and as with the other stuff, I'm just kind of avoiding the line details a little bit to leave a darker border around them, but not too much. I want the canopy to be brighter and kind of a focal point with a dark pilot and dark metallic showing through it. So this is going to be the brighter section of the model that we're doing. So just giving this a base coat all over again over our undercoat. Okay, now we're going to be sticking with this theme for a while, and that is that we're just adding more and more of this magenta to our mix, and we're concentrating more on the the areas further from the edges and stuff like that. One thing worth bearing in mind, I want these panels or this exhaust port or whatever it is, that's going to be stained fairly dark in our final model. Got a comparison here. That's the type of effect I'm aiming for. So we'll be trying to achieve something not dissimilar to where the highlights are placed on this one. So starting on the areas that are going to be brightest, that might even be a little bit too subtle there, but we can see the colours starting to build up now. And then the areas that are upwards facing, they're going to get attention as well. We'll work our way all around the model doing that, just adding more magenta as we go. I think I'll probably pop on a time lapse for this, and that'll give you guys a greater deal of transparency as to the entire process of where I put things. Alright, so all we've got here really is, especially having seen the first part of the model, we're basically doing exactly what we did there, but we're going to be giving greater preference early on to the amount of the model that the brighter colours cover. So we want to be hitting the majority of the model of these brighter colours until possibly even the yellow. I just want it to stand out as being a far amped up version of the wings in the model, or whatever you called. So I'll pop on time lapse again. You'll see me mixing these into each other. I have here scales pink, and then we've got the orange and the yellow from Vallejo. I'm using this one because I've already used it elsewhere on the model, but as I said, the lack of like intense matte finish on Vallejo's I think works better for dry brushing, so I'll be using those throughout the rest of it. Trying to leave these areas separate, and then what I'll do is I'll probably come in with some shading, which I'll do a proper video for on time lapse, and we'll hit these areas up here and we'll exaggerate our contrast. This is really starting to take shape now. I've popped it on the canopy, which you might have seen in the time lapse. I popped it on the body of the model in the time lapse to see what we're kind of going for. Find a pointing brush. So a couple of these areas aren't as subtle as I'd like, but I do want to push the contrast further. So what I'm going to do at this stage is, you notice here I've got this great big wiggle of one of my paints. That's because here it was all that was coming out, despite the fact it's been shaken properly, was the medium of the paint. So I've done a great big squiggle until I get to paint that is behaving how I want. Unfortunately, what that's done with more of the medium being evident is it just takes a little bit longer to dry. So I'm going to go off, hair dry this now, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do some shading before continuing with our highlighting. It's looking pretty good though, and this is going to look nuts. It's going to look ridiculous. Alright, you can see my palette is being taken over by the colours from this job, so pop a little bit more paint on. Now this is quite a careful stage, so we've been going pretty much without worrying about screwing up until now, but slow down if you do this stage, really recommend it. So taking a bit of our blue on our medium here from the Series D range, and we're going to be using angling really carefully here. This is very similar to airbrushing, so I'm basically gently buffing shading onto this model here. See, it's already made a difference on that one, and if I do it at this angle I'm not going to hit anything over the top of these pieces, so we can really exaggerate the shading on the steeper sections of them. And then around these areas, it's a bit more direct. And it's just a matter of patiently kind of stippling and buffing up. A little bit of that blue on them. It's up to you how much you want to do this. I'm going to use it to, particularly around these sections, we don't have to be as subtle at all. And you can see how fast you can get a fairly soft blend even on something that's really highly contrasted when you're not too worried about it standing out. There we go, that's nice. So these exhausts are going to look much more appropriate now. But what we're doing by doing this not as our very last stage is we're gaining a couple of things. One of them is that our edge highlighting is still going to hit these edges, so these won't just be flat dark detail, these will be flat dark detail then with our final stages of dry brushing showing up on them, so it's actually quite a big difference. We'll go around the entirety of the model doing this. Anywhere where we want to push the contrast, we're just giving this some contouring basically at this point. It's very, very detail based. There we go, so already made a huge difference to what's going on there. We'll just carry on ramping this. We've got a mid-tone, a highlight, and we're going to have a final highlighting, or highlights, a couple of colours now, but we've just reintroduced our shadows, so already this has done quite a lot for our final paint job. Alright, so that's had an amazing effect here. Everything has kind of been amped up. It may not look hugely subtle at the moment, but that doesn't matter because we've done it before we've done our edges, so anywhere where this is kind of crossed over from this side to this side a little, let's see if I can get that in there, see some flecks, a little bit of overspill here, we'll catch that with our next stages hopefully. Areas that I've paid a little bit of extra attention to, I've gone into the sides here, of any kind of spherical stuff in the centre, and I've also caught the outlines of the cockpit, just because that feels like a good idea, and then these symbols have been kind of smudged in. I had to take extra care around here because we're really close to other super bright bits, but that's worked extremely effectively, so I'm going to grab myself a medium again. Different one here because this one has still got some residue of the blue in. You can see how much has been removed there, even though it is a potent paint, but we'll clean that afterwards. And so now we're going to step onto this one, and we're introducing the bright colours. So a little bit of water in the dampening pad, there we go. And now we're stepping right back into the super bright spectrum. So we've still got some of that magenta going on. We have a little bit of the pink too. But the headliner is the orange. And this orange is pretty potent, so proceed with care at this point. We've stepped down the brush size, that's going to give us a little bit greater control. And we just want to work our way back into those areas where we decided we wanted the highlights before. So not anything techy in terms of where we're choosing to put them. We're not trying to achieve anything massively different from our previous step. But now it's going next to something where we've put some levels of contrast on. Whatever we do is going to look brighter than the previous step, just because it's going to be next to or closer to darker stuff. So carefully work your way around the model, stippling, and fill in all those areas that we have in the previous stages. So just so I'm not working entirely with fluorescent to this point, I'm just going to scoop a fairly generous helping of Trollslayer Orange onto my palette. You could use Fire Dragon Bright if you wanted something a little bit more in the kind of pastel spectrum. There it is there, just depends how bright you're looking and going for. I'll put some on my palette in case I want to play with that. But these are just to make sure that we're not working entirely with fluorescent paints because they're just a bit more tricky to kind of get decent coverage with. So by pulling a little bit of this or these into my mix and taking a bit more of the other orange, hopefully we can get it to just go down on the model a little more effectively. There you go, I think that's made a difference. Obviously, because they're not fluorescent, they will have the side effect of making things seem not quite as luminous, but we need to get stuff hitting edges, and if we're using kind of almost gel-like fluorescent paints, it's going to be a lot harder. There we go, you can see the difference that's made immediately. So just by introducing those, even if they're not giving us exactly the color we want, they are giving us a lot in terms of workability and cooperation from our paint for the techniques we're using. So this will help us step up and start introducing the dry brushing as well as the stippling, and we'll take these all over the model. So now we've gone around that orange, we've made sure to hit every single edge we can, even if it's just a little bit, because the next step involves us adding some yellow, and that yellow is really going to stand out if it goes down kind of onto virgin territory that hasn't been hit by some of our brighter colours. So a little bit of our Trollslayer, a little bit of our Fluo Orange, make sure we know how it's going to behave. And then catching our edges here, all the lips, they're getting the attention first, but also stippling our areas for our highlights. I think what I'll do at the end of this is I'll either hit it with an all over wash or an all over matte varnish, and that'll do a couple of things, but one of them will just ensure that we've got the same level of finish all over, because we've got some things that are somewhat shiny here, some things that are super matte, and it's kind of throwing off the smoothness of the entire model. You could have achieved an amazing result and then look down at your model and think you've actually not done a great job, when really you have. It's just the paints you've used don't have similar finishes, and it's really, really evident. I think it's something that people forget, especially if you're chopping and changing and switching between different ranges, Vallejo, Games Workshop, Scale 75, whatever, they all have a slightly different finish, and within those ranges the paints have a slightly different finish. Some Scale 75 are super matte for the majority of the range, but some of them are a little bit less so, and they really stand out. So going with this model, kind of picking out our key areas, and we'll just continue like this until we've caught all the edges and stippled a little bit in the areas where we want to have a kind of a brighter hue on show. Right, so any of you familiar with our ghost wall, or if you see me playing on Instagram Live or on Great Unclean Ones or anything like that, you'll be familiar with what I'm doing this step. So I'm jumping to ice yellow, putting that in with our mix. Now this is going to result in a kind of a very light peachy hue, which really stands out in terms of what we've got on the rest of our model. We're not putting this down because we want this to be an end result, we're putting it down because we want to put some fluorescence over it and have them really, really stand out. You can see it's edge highlighting really nicely anyway. There's nothing wrong with this type of finish if you did want to, but essentially this is here to flavour the layers that are going to go on top of it. So I'm hitting all of our edges. I'm going to carefully hit some of the extremities or the middles of the big sections that we've decided we want to be brighter or have become brighter. Particularly areas like the top half of this, so we've got this kind of, I don't know, non-metallic metal or lit glow going on where they'd be reflecting more than other bits, but it's a really, really clever way to get the most out of using fluorescent paint. So take your time with it. We're nearly at the final stages. Make sure that you're doing it pretty subtly if possible. You could involve white in this, but I don't think currently that there's really a need to. And if you are getting those edges, as we've done earlier in the videos, 45 degrees is all you need. And just make sure that you don't have too much paint on the brush, or that it is too wet or too dry. You want that lovely middle ground. Areas like this, you should be able to gently buff up, and using the rolling technique, hit the particular edges that you're after, fairly specifically given that you're using even if it's not a large brush by dry brushing standards, it's a fairly large brush by edge highlighting standards. A little bit of subtle work here, you can get a lot of the detailing done. So this all over the model, and then we'll come back with some brighter colours. Alright, so that's really been worth it. It's already looking pretty good here. We've kind of got some type of sci-fi synthwave version of copper going on these top panels. I really like that. It's without a shadow of a doubt my favourite part of the model so far. So we're going to continue here. Actually ended up adding a tiny bit of white in with the ice yellow and the orange for these edge bits, but now we're going to go back to our orange, dip into a little bit of yellow. So we're dealing with really bright colours here. We don't have any of the white or the ice yellow in or anything like that though, so nothing super opaque. We've got the much thinner, more gel-like paints going on instead. Work it into the brush. Oh my god, that's bright. And now we're trying to hit these edges. Not only the edges, but also buff up these sections we've hit. So you can see there's no white remaining in that section. We've just simply covered the white we put there with a much brighter colour, which is jumping out all the more for going over the white. That doesn't mean we can't go back and use the ice yellow again, but it's just making sure that this stuff that we do put down is it really lands in an impactful fashion. So that's it basically, all over the sections that we've just done with our orange mix. Then we'll come back and we'll highlight what we've done. Okay, that's worked a treat. So back to our ice yellow. Get that in the mix, get a little bit of our orange. Work them in together, and then we've got whatever this is, like turbo peach. Pull it up a little bit more with a tiny bit of yellow. And this is just, I don't know, if the last one was turbo peach, this is like citrus overload. So we're hitting the edges that we want to be our absolute kind of eye-catching highlights down the central sections of these spherical bits. We can even take a little bit of white, pop that into the mix. And it's just a matter of catching all of our edges, pushing the bits we want to push, maybe a tiny bit of stippling in certain sections. We'll do that all over and we'll come back. Alright, that is it. So pretty pleased with this. There are a couple of areas for me to learn from retrospectively. This section here I could probably wash down in the middle to make it match this one more, because this is darker. I can show you with some water, so I could put a wash like that in here, maybe with the bluer colours. I'll pull that down. It's not completely even, but like this purple here comes up to here, whereas it doesn't come as far here. But again, I could fix that with washes exactly where you can see that I'm putting water on it at this point. Really solid though, and it has really made me think that I could actually have highlighted this one slightly differently, but we'll continue with all of this and it'll look amazing. So just a quick note on the detailing. I'm keeping things fairly simple on the sections of this model that aren't the coloured ones. So they've been hit with a base coat of just iron breaker or something like that. Any mid silver is fine, but you don't want a particularly dark one. The reason for not wanting a dark one is that we're going to be pulling down the shading with this mix here. This mix is Scale 75's Huldra Blue. Unsurprisingly, we're just keeping things cohesive by using that. A little bit of Vallejo's Glaze Medium, which can turn anything into a wash, which is a really useful and amazing paint to play with. I'm using the big size 4 here, which I'll make sure I clean afterwards because washes are quite abusive on brushes. And I'm going to do a couple of washes all over, not too thick, not too thin, of the silver sections. Blow any bubbles that you get, and just if you use the big brush and its big belly to kind of smudge things around and make sure you don't have any excessive pooling anywhere. It's really, really useful for that. So a couple of stages this all over is a really good way to kind of get a muted background metal tone, and the blue makes sure that it stays cohesive with the rest of our model. And we've used a colour that's in the base coat, so it's going to help it pull back into the recesses rather than, I don't want this to take centre stage, I want it to be a background to our bright and colourful kind of wings and top section that we've got. Okay, so here we have the finished result. The metallic sections I've hit with Iron Breaker, or any mid-silver is fine. Chrome from Vallejo or silver from Vallejo would be great too. And then 2 or 3 washes of a mix of our deep blue, our base coat, the Huldra Blue, glaze medium, which is also from Vallejo, but you could just pop some blue washes over there to exactly the same effect. I've mixed some blue washes in. The green sections have been done in the same colours as our ghost wall, but I didn't really want to pull too much attention away from the rest of the model. This has been really successful, especially up here. I think these sections where you've got a point to have a kind of a lighting interest, and the spherical bits here have turned out really solidly, but overall the effect is brilliant. It's quite difficult to get something like this to show up on camera, so hopefully we'll get some better shots up or some stills, but yeah, really, really pleased with that result. So if you've liked it, please let us know any suggestions you have, queries, questions, things I didn't answer in the video. If you'd like to see more stuff like this or more Necrons, let us know that as well. And if you have any other questions or things you'd like to see us tackle in the future, please let us know that down below in the comments. Alright, so I think we achieved our objective of copying a doggy. So I'm really pleased with that. The learning point about scale 75 paints is a really good one, just to touch on that. If you do have issues in any paint job with the finishes of your paints making things look worse than they actually are, just hit it with a varnish at the end. As long as you're not having difficulties working with it, you can just make everything kind of homogenized and all have the same finish. Just a note, if using metallics, I often varnish everything, then do the metallics, because I want them to have a more shiny finish than the rest of the piece. So if you've liked it, please like the video, please subscribe, hit that bell notification. And if you've got any more suggestions or color schemes, or you'd like to see me do this but with metallics or anything like that, pop it below. We love your suggestions. We read each and every one of them. They all go into a master spreadsheet, believe it or not, and we use that when we're choosing what we should do for future content. So thank you very much for watching, and we hope to see you again in our next video.